O faithful ones, should ye visit the resting place of the most exalted leaf, who hath ascended unto the glorious companion, stand ye and say, Salutation and blessing and glory upon thee, O holy leaf that hath sprung from the divine lote tree. I bear witness that thou hast believed in God and in his signs, and answered his call, and turned unto him, and held fast unto his cord, and clung to the hem of his grace, and fled thy home in his path, and chosen to live as a stranger, out of love for his presence, and in thy longing to serve him. May God have mercy upon him that draweth nigh unto thee, and remembereth thee through the things which my pen hath voiced in this the most great station. We pray God that he may forgive us, and forgive them that have turned unto thee, and grant their desires, and bestow upon them through his wondrous grace whatever be their wish. He verily is the bountiful, the generous. Praise be to God, he who is the desire of all worlds, and the beloved of all who recognize him. Bahá'u'lláh.
Thank you so much. So now I'll introduce our speaker for today, and just a reminder to save all your questions until after the talk when we'll have our questions and answers portion. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, please fill out the Google form that we will put in the chat. Our speaker this week is Miss Baharieh Rouhani Maani, and her topic is Asiyih Khanum, the wife of Baha'u'lláh and the mother of Abdu'l. Baharieh Rouhani Maani is from the lineage of early responders to the cause of the Bab and Baha'u'lláh in Nayriz. She was born and raised in Shiraz, studied Persian literature at the University of Shiraz before settling in Kenya as a Baha'i pioneer in December 1960. In December 1971, she was invited to serve on the staff of the Baha'i World Center, which lasted about 38 years. She relocated to Washington, D.C. in August 2009. She's a researcher, translator, and author. She has published books in English. The latest is The Leaves of the Twin Divine Trees, an in-depth study of the lives of women closely related to the Bab and Baha'u'lláh. She has also published numerous articles in English and Farsi on the status of women in religion and other topics. And with that, I'll hand it off to Ms. Rouhani Maani.
Thank you, Bayan, for that introduction. And greetings, everyone. It's my pleasure to share my next hour with all those who are participating in this program. I have been asked to give a brief introduction to Baha'i Faith before I start the topic on Asiyih Khanum. That introduction I like to base on a brief quotation from the writings of Baha'u'lláh, which says, "From among all created things, God had singled out for his special favor the pure, the gem-like reality of man, and invested it with a unique capacity of knowing him and of reflecting the greatness of his glory. To provide for the actualization of that unique capacity, God has been sending divine educators from time to time, according to the capacity and requirements of every age. Baha'is believe this is the age of the coming of age of the human race, and Baha'u'lláh is the divine teacher for this age. His teachings revolve around the axis of unity, the unity of God, the unity of religion, and the unity of humankind. The spiritual teachings of past religions are reiterated and confirmed in the Baha'i Faith. Additional provisions meeting the needs of a united humanity are delineated and decreed by Baha'u'lláh. Among them are world peace, equality of men and women, elimination of prejudices of every kind, supreme tribunal, abolition of extreme wealth and poverty, universal and compulsory education for all, international auxiliary language, harmony between religion and science, and so forth. The principle of the equality of sexes has multiple aspects. One of them is treating women fairly in history. It is a great pleasure for me to have this opportunity today to speak about Asiyih Khanum, a most remarkable woman, not only in the Baha'i faith, but in the annals of religion. I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation which I like to share. About Asiyih Khanum. She was born to a couple in Yadrud. Yadrud is a small town in the province of Mazandaran, and it was about 200 years ago that Asiyih Khanum was born. Her father, Mirza Ismail Yadrudi, was a man of means and influence. No information is available about her mother, about Asiyih Khanum's mother. Anonymity was the lot of Iranian women living in the 19th century. Traditional gender biases required women to be generally obscure. Seldom were women's personal information made public. For that reason, Asiyih Khanum's birth date is also untraceable. She may have been born in 1822 or around that time. Little is known about Asiyih Khanum's childhood and early life. All available sources agree that she was exceedingly beautiful. Also, that her inborn nobility won her the title Nawabe, meaning noble woman. Unlike most women of her time, she knew how to read and write. This was a real blessing because women were generally denied of education. Asiyih Khanum's life assumed significance when in 1835, she married Mirza Hossein Ali, the son of Mirza Abdu'l and Khadija Khanum. Mirza Hossein Ali is the prophet founder of the Bahá'í Faith, and he later became known as Bahá'u'lláh. Mirza Hossein Ali and Asiyih Khanum resided in Tehran, but frequently visited their respective homes in Takur and Yadrud. The families of Mirza Hossein Ali and Asiyih Khanum had been previously united through the marriage of Sareh Khanum, Mirza Hossein Ali's sister, with Mirza Mahmud, the brother of Asiyih Khanum. So this was the second marriage uniting these two families of Mirza Abdu'l and Mirza Ismail. Sareh Khanum was instrumental in obtaining her parents' approval for the marriage of Mirza Hossein Ali and Asiyih Khanum. Let's trace Asiyih Khanum's life from 1835, when she got married, to 1852, when Baha'u'lláh was exiled, and Asiyih Khanum and her children accompanied him on his exile. In the first 17 years of her married life, Asiyih Khanum gave birth to 6 children. The first 2 died in infancy. The third was named Abbas. He later adopted Abdu'l, which means servant of Baha, as his title. He was born on May 23rd, 1844, the day that Sayyid Ali Muhammad, the Bab, declared in Shiraz that he was the promised Qa'im. Shortly after his declaration, the Bab directed the first one who believed in him, his name is Mullah Hussein. He sent him to the city which he said enshrined a mystery of such transcendent holiness as neither Hijaz nor Shiraz can hope to rival. That city was Tehran, and the mystery of transcendent holiness was Mirza Hussein Ali, who later became known as Baha'u'lláh, which means glory of God. During his short ministry, the Bab prepared the people for the coming of a greater manifestation of God, whose advent was to follow his own. Baha'u'lláh was that manifestation. Upon receiving the Bab's message, Mirza Hussein Ali embraced the cause of the Bab and promoted it tirelessly. He soon became the recognized leader of the Babi community. Asiyih Khanum supported his work wholeheartedly. Baha'u'lláh and Asiyih Khanum's house in Tehran became the center of gatherings of the Babis visiting from different parts of Iran. Baha'u'llah's widespread teaching activities had a direct bearing on Asiyih Khanum, whose unconditional support from behind the scene ensured the comfort and well-being of the visitors frequently visiting the house. Baha'u'lláh and Asiyih Khanum's daughter, Baharieh, who was born in 1846, has described how her parents lived before Baha'u'lláh was arrested and imprisoned in the Siyah Char, which means Black Pit, the worst prison in Tehran, in consequence of his activities promoting the Bahá'í Faith. She says, in the early years of their married life, they, that is, her father and mother, took part as little as possible in state functions, social ceremonies, and the luxurious habits of ordinary, highly placed, and wealthy families in the land of Persia. She and her noble-hearted husband, that is Asiyih Khanum and Baha'u'lláh, counted these worldly pleasures meaningless and preferred rather to occupy themselves in caring for the poor and for all who were unhappy or in trouble. She says, from our door, nobody was ever turned away. The hospitable board was spread for all comers. Whilst the people called my father the father of the poor, they spoke of my mother as the mother of consolation. Though naturally, she says, only the women and little children ever looked upon her face and wept. What happened to Asiyih Khanum when Bahá'u'lláh was arrested and imprisoned? Let's first see what caused Bahá'u'llah's imprisonment. In 1852, 3 young Babis, severely affected by persecutions of the adherents of the Bahá'í Faith, made an unsuccessful attempt on the life of Nasruddin Shah. That foolish act became pretext for the authorities to kill not only the perpetrators, but also countless other Babis. They also arrested and imprisoned a large number of the adherents of the nascent faith, the faith of the Bab. Baha'u'lláh, the known leader of the Babis, was arrested and imprisoned for 4 months in the worst prison in Tehran, called the Siyah. His house was plundered. Asiyih Khanum and the surviving children, who were 3 by that time, had to take shelter in 2 rented rooms in an obscure lane in the vicinity of the Siyah. I will share with you one story related by Abdu'l about his mother. And Abdu'l already referred to his mother as Hazrat Walideh, Her Highness the Mother. He says, I was a child about 9 years old when we were surrounded by calamities and assaulted by the enemies. They had thrown so many stones into our house that it was full of stones. We had nobody except mother, sister, and Agha Mirza Qoli. I think he's the youngest uncle of Abdu'l, who remained faithful to Baha'u'lláh. To provide us with better protection, he said, mother took us from the gate of Shemiran to the Sanglak location, where she found a house in an obscure lane, and she looked after us there. She strictly forbade us to leave the house until one day our living circumstances became so difficult that mother told me to go to my aunt's, that is Baha'u'llah's sister's house, and tell her to use all means at her disposal to find us a few Quran. Quran now is Riyal. Riyal is the same as Quran. And in those days, it must have been much more valuable than what its value is today. He says, after giving an account of how he was treated by the children on his way back home, he says they shouted and threw stones. Now this is an 8-9-year-old boy. They shouted and threw stones. When I reached the shop of Agha Muhammad Hassan Sanduqdar, the children did not come any closer. In brief, when I reached home, I was so tired and fearful that I collapsed. Mother asked, what is the matter with you? But I could not respond. I passed out suddenly. Mother took the handkerchief containing the money and put me to sleep. This gives us a glimpse of what this family went through during the time they had lost everything and Baha'u'lláh was in prison. Let's see who is really Asiyih Khanum as a person, as a figure, as a historical figure. The 54th chapter of the book of Isaiah contains reference to the woman whose maker, it says, is her husband. This is the prophecy. Enlarge the place of thy tent and let them stretch forth the curtains of thine habitation. Spare not, lengthen thy cords and strengthen thy stakes, for thou shalt break forth on the right hand and on the left, and thy seed shall inherit the Gentiles and make the desolate cities to be inhabited. Then it says, for thy maker is thine husband, the Lord of hosts is his name, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, the God of the whole earth, shall he be called. We know this because one of the believers, I believe in the United States, actually asked Abdu'l about this prophecy. And Abdu'l said, it's about his mother. All right, we were talking before the prophecy was mentioned about Baha'u'lláh being imprisoned in Tehran. After 4 months imprisonment in the Siyah, Baha'u'lláh was freed on condition that he leave Iran for good. In a prayer, he makes reference to the decree and what befell him, his family and companions. By decree, it's the decree of God. That's what he means, not the decree of the Shah, the decree of God. He says, thy decree was irrevocably fixed, and thy behest summoned his servant to depart out of Persia, accompanied by a number of frail-bodied men and children of tender age. At this time, when the cold is so intense that one cannot even speak, and ice and snow so abundant that it's impossible to move. It was early in 1853, in the middle of the winter, when Baha'u'lláh and his family were sent into exile. And in those days, there were no planes, no cars. They had to travel by mule. Bahá'í Khanum, the daughter of Baha'u'lláh, Asiyih Khanum, describes the journey from Tehran to Baghdad. She says, this journey was filled with indescribable difficulties. My mother had no experience, no servants, no provisions, and very little money left. My father was extremely ill, not have recovered from the ordeals of the torture and the prison. No one of all our friends and relations dared to come to our help or even to say goodbye. But one old lady, the grandmother of Asiyih Khanum. We 3 children were very young. My brother 8 and I 6 years old. Mirza Mehdi, who is titled the purest branch, was very delicate, and my mother allowed herself to be persuaded to leave the little fellow, only 2 years old, with her grandmother, though the parting with him was very sad. My poor mother, how she suffered on this journey, riding in a takhte ravan, borne on a jolting mule. And this took place only 6 weeks before her youngest son was born. That means Asiyih Khanum was about 7 months pregnant during that journey towards the end, because Bahá'í Khanum says 6 weeks after arrival in Baghdad, that child was born. Bahá'í Khanum said about her mother, never did she utter one word of complaint. She was always thinking of some kindness for somebody, and sympathy she gave unsparingly to all in their difficulties. When we came to a city, my mother would take the clothes and wash them at the public baths. We also were able to have baths at those places. She would carry the cold, wet clothes away in her arms. Drying them was an almost impossible task. Her lovely hands, being unused to such coarse work, became very painful. For those who may not know what Taht-e-Rawan is, it's a kind of wooden cabin mounted on mules, and they carried women and those who could not walk or ride on the mule. Because remember, it was winter and it was very cold, and the snow had covered the mountaintops, and they had to pass through those mountains. About life in Baghdad, Bahá'í Khanum says, we struggled through this period as bravely as we could, until after a time, occasional remittances came to us from Tehran. The proceeds of personal effects, jewels, cloth of gold, and other valuable articles, which were a part of my mother's dowry. Remember, they had plundered everything that Bahá'u'lláh had, and these were the things that were included in Asiyih Khanum's dowry. They were sold, and the proceeds helped the family during the early years in Baghdad. This money ameliorated our condition to a considerable extent, she said. Asiyih Khanum, my mother, was in delicate health. Her strength was diminished by the hardships she had undergone, but she always worked beyond her force. Then she says, sometimes my father himself helped in the cooking. The hardships she had endured saddened the heart of her divine husband, who was also her beloved Lord. He gave this help both before his sojourn in the wilderness of Rouhani and after his return. We will see about Baha'u'llah's sojourn in Soleimaniye shortly. And this is about Baha'u'lláh leaving Baghdad a year after they arrived in that city. Bahá'í Khanum says, our grief was intense when my father left us. He told none of us either where he was going or when he would return. So we, my mother, my brother Abbas, and I clung together in our sorrow and anxiety. In the interest of time, I cannot go into what caused Baha'u'lláh to leave Baghdad and go to Kurdistan. Soleimaniye is in Kurdistan. Bahá'í Khanum says, during this time, the darling baby brother, born after arrival in Baghdad, became seriously ill. My mother was heartbroken when the little one died. The sweet body of our beautiful baby was given to a man who took it away, and we never knew even where he was laid. I remember so clearly, she said, the sorrow of those days. About what Asiyih Khanum went through during the time Baha'u'lláh was away in Kurdistan. In his message in Persian dated 25 December 1939, Shoghi Effendi, who is the great-grandson of Baha'u'lláh and Asiyih Khanum, who Abdu'l had named as the guardian of the cause of God, refers to the blame, dispraise, and slander aimed at Asiyih Khanum by the people of envy during the 2 years that Baha'u'lláh spent in the mountains of Kurdistan. He also refers to the humiliation, cruelty, and transgressions that she suffered at the hands of the stirrers of mischief. Shoghi Effendi's statement brings to mind Prophet Isaiah's prophecy about Asiyih Khanum. This is the continuation of the prophecy that the first part of it was read several slides earlier. He says, "For the Lord hath called thee as a woman forsaken and grieved in spirit, and a wife of youth when thou wast refused, saith thy God. For a small moment have I forsaken thee, but with great mercies will I gather thee. In a little wrath I hide my face from thee. In a little wrath I hid my face from thee for a moment, but with everlasting kindness will I have mercy on thee, saith the Lord thy Redeemer." Having talked about all the tribulations that Asiyih Khanum went through during that time, it's befitting that mention be made of two exhilarating events in Asiyih Khanum's life during the Baghdad period. One was Baha'u'llah's return to Baghdad in March 1856 from his 2-year sojourn in Kurdistan. Two, reuniting with her son, Mirza Mehdi, who was left in Tehran when the family left for Baghdad. The reunion took place after a 6-year separation. Mirza Mehdi was with his grandmother, Asiyih Khanum's grandmother actually, who took the baby and raised him. And 8 years later, he reunited with his father and mother. Then after Baghdad, after about 10 years in Baghdad, Baha'u'lláh was asked to go to Istanbul, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. It was called Constantinople then. As we all know from the history of the Bahá'í Faith, Baha'u'lláh left Baghdad and stayed in a restaurant in a garden outside the city for 12 days. He arrived on 23rd April, 1863, and the family was to follow him immediately, but because of a tide, the boat could not cross, and the family joined him 9 days later. During the first day of that 12 days period, Baha'u'lláh declared that he was the one promised by the God. And after the family arrived on the 9th day, they spent 3 more days in that garden. And on the 12th day, they all left for Istanbul. Baha'u'lláh says about that decree, that infamous decree of Sultan Abdu'l that banished the exiles suddenly and without any justification whatsoever in the depth of winter and in the most humiliating circumstances. After Adrianople, after Istanbul, after Constantinople, they were exiled to Adrianople on the extremities of the empire. Adrianople today is called Edirne. About life in Edirne, also, we know that Baha'u'llah's brother, half-brother, who had turned against him, his excessive passion for leadership prompted him to plan and commit the heinous act of poisoning Baha'u'lláh in Edirne. Mirza Yahya saw himself as the leader of the Babi community. However, he was so fearful, he had to hide behind Baha'u'lláh all the time because he was fearful of being discovered, arrested, and dealt with mercilessly. However, in Edirne, he thought it was his opportunity to make his claim public. And as a result, Baha'u'lláh and the followers of Baha'u'lláh had to decide. And the great separation took place. And the ordeals of Asiyih Khanum about her anxiety and concern for Baha'u'llah's safety was diminished after this great separation took place. And Mirza Yahya could no longer associate with the Baha'u'llah family and those who were following Baha'u'llah. After about 5 years in Adrianople, on 12 August 1868, Baha'u'llah, his family and companions left this far corner of the European continent, entitled by him the remote prison and the land of mystery, for the final place of exile, the citadel of Akka. Arrival in Akka, I don't know how we are doing time-wise. It seems we still have time. At length, Bahá'í Khanum says we arrived at Haifa, where we had to be carried ashore in chairs. Here, we remained for a few hours. Now we embarked again for the last bit of our sea journey. The heat was overpowering. We were put into a sailing boat. There being no wind, sailing boats move with the direction of the wind. So there being no wind and no shelter from the burning rays of the sun, Bahá'í Khanum says we spent 8 hours of positive misery. And at last, we had reached Akka, the end of our journey. The landing at this place was achieved with much difficulty. The ladies of our party were carried ashore. All the townspeople had assembled to see the arrival of the prisoners. Having been told that we were infidels, criminals, and sowers of sedition, the attitude of the crowd was threatening. Their yelling of curses and execrations filled us with fresh misery. We were terrified of the unknown. We knew not what the fate of our party, the friends and ourselves would be. We were taken to the old fortress of Akka, where we were crowded together. There was no air. A small quantity of very bad, coarse bread was provided. We were unable to get fresh water to drink. Our sufferings were not diminished. Then an epidemic of typhoid broke out. Nearly all became ill. The prisoners were housed in an army barrack. Mirza Mehdi, the son of Baha'u'lláh and Asiyih Khanum, by then was about 20 years old. He was a beautiful young man. He served as Baha'u'llah's amanuensis. Every afternoon, he would present himself to Baha'u'lláh to take dictation when Baha'u'lláh revealed tablets. On one fateful afternoon, according to Shoghi Effendi, Mirza Mehdi was pacing the roof of the barracks in the twilight, wrapped in his customary devotions, when he fell through the unguarded skylight onto a wooden crate standing on the floor beneath, which pierced his ribs. Baha'u'llah's offer of his son as ransom. Remember, for 2 years, the prisoners had been in this army barracks. They had no contact with the outside. Nothing was moving, nothing was working. No one knew what the future was holding. And it seems that some ransom was needed to resolve the situation. That's when Baha'u'llah refers to the martyrdom of his son in a prayer. He says, I have, O my Lord, offered up that which thou hast given me, that thy servants may be quickened and all that dwell on earth be united. This was the price that Baha'u'llah paid for the unification of the world and for the quickening of the people. Now for Asiyih Khanum, having enjoyed for a while reunion with this son that she had left in Iran as a child, reunited with him after 6 years in Baghdad, and now seeing him in a state that she could not bear. We have a description of that incident by Nabi, which says, the terrifying sound of the fall echoed in the surrounding area. It was as if the day of resurrection had been renewed. The loving, frail, and weeping mother of the purest branch forced herself to the site where her beloved son was lying. As she beheld him soaked in blood, she gave an agonizing sigh and lost consciousness. The purest branch, despite his weakness and tormenting pain, took his mother in his arms. Abdu'l attained the presence of Baha'u'llah and prostrating himself before his exalted father, implored him with tearful eyes to bestow healing upon his brother. The Blessed Beauty responded thus, "O my most mighty branch, leave him to his Lord." That is, leave his affairs to God, so that he may do as he pleases. The greatest branch bowed his head in submission and directed others to be resigned to the will of God. And here is Nabil's description of Asiyih Khanum's reaction. Nabil says that at that time, Asiyih Khanum, the grief-stricken mother of the purest branch, attained the presence of Baha'u'lláh, prostrated herself at the threshold of his grandeur and said, "My Lord, I entreat thee to accept from me this ransom." The Blessed Beauty conferred his bountiful favors upon her and advised her to be patient. Asiyih Khanum responded, "Whatever is thy good pleasure, that indeed is my heart's desire and my best beloved." Neither could Asiyih Khanum nor any other member of the family accompany the body on its journey to the Nabi Saleh cemetery in Akka, where it was laid to rest. They were prisoners and could not leave the barracks. None of Asiyih Khanum's numerous woes and sufferings compare in magnitude to the loss of her beautiful son in the prime of his age. The aftermath of the martyrdom of Mirza Mehdi, entitled The Purest Branch. Shortly after the tragic death of Mirza Mehdi, the stringent conditions imposed on the prisoners for 2 years eased. The prisoners were allowed to take up residence within the walled city of Akka. To make preparations for an imminent war, the Turkish army needed the barracks. Baha'u'lláh and members of his family moved quarters in the vicinity of the barracks. After a brief stay in 2 different houses, they moved to the house of Abdu'l, where they stayed for 7 years. I'm trying to find the next one. The next event is Baha'u'lláh, after 7 years in the house of Abdu'l, moves to the mansion of Baharieh. It's called the mansion of Baharieh, that Abdu'l Baha had rented for Baha'u'lláh to move to. But Asiyih Khanum stayed in Akka in the house of Abdu'l and lived with Abdu'l Baha and his family and Bahá'í Khanum, her daughter. I should mention, I'm trying to find this slide, that Abdu'l Baha got married in 1872. And that was the greatest happiness that Asiyih Khanum had during that period. So by the time Baha'u'lláh moved to Mazdae, Abdu'l Baha had his own family and continued to live in the house of Abdu'l. This is about the marriage of Abdu'l, and after that, the passing of Asiyih Khanum. When Asiyih Khanum fell from an elevation and became very ill, Baha'u'lláh came to be with her in the house of Abdu'l, and he was actually at her bedside when she passed away. He revealed a long visitation prayer in which he bears witness that she, Asiyih Khanum, endured all the hardships and sufferings that he bore until she offered up her soul in his path before his countenance. He testifies that she believed firmly in God, in his books, his prophets, and in all that has been sent down from the heaven of his will. He bids her rejoice in the highest paradise for having been mentioned by the King of Names, and reaffirms that she attained unto all good, that God elevated her to a station round which circled every glory and high station. He refers to her as the most exalted lead. Then, addressing the people of Baha, he says, and the next one is actually the prayer that is read at her resting place, which was a part of the devotional that was read at the beginning. After she passed away, she was buried in a cemetery in Akka. And which was a different cemetery where Mirza Mehdi was buried. And after many, many years, I think about 50 years, Shoghi Effendi transferred the remains of Mirza Mehdi and Asiyih Khanum from Akka to an area on Mount Carmel, close to the shrine of the Bab. And when he transferred the remains, he sent a message in which he says the conjunction of the resting place of the greatest holy leaf, the greatest holy leaf, that is Bahá'í Khanum, had already passed away in 1932 and had been buried on Mount Carmel in this special spot that today is known as Monument Gardens on Mount Carmel. So Shoghi Effendi referring to the conjunction of the resting place of the greatest holy leaf with those of her brother and mother incalculably reinforces the spiritual potencies of that consecrated spot, which under the wings of the Bab's overshadowing sepulchre and in the vicinity of the future Mashraq al-Askar, which will be read on its flank, is destined to evolve into the focal center of those administrative institutions ordained by Baha'u'lláh and anticipated by Abdu'l, and which are to function in consonance with the principles that govern between institutions of the guardianship and the universal house of justice. He says, then and only then will this momentous prophecy which illuminates the concluding passages of the Tablet of Carmel be fulfilled. And that is the prophecy. Ere long will God set his ark upon thee, which is a reference to Carmel, and will manifest the people of Baha who have mentioned in the book of names. This is a reference to the Universal House of Justice. My last slide is the twin monuments that were built on the resting places of Asiyih Khanum and Mirza Mehdi. And you will see in the background the seat of the Universal House of Justice, which is placed on the top of the ark that was created on Mount Carmel. With this, I end this presentation, if I can call it. Thank you for your patience. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rouhani Maani, for your talk. I really enjoyed. I didn't know any of these details before about the life of Asiyih Khanum, so I'm really grateful for this. So thank you again. And now we have time for questions and answers. So if you have questions, you can put it in the chat and I will read it out. So our first question is, what is Mother of Consolation in Farsi?
Oh, now you're testing my lingual ability. The consolation is Rahati, is someone who puts everybody at ease, makes everybody happy, attends to people's needs. I don't know, other Persians have been out of Iran for 60 years. I studied Persian literature, but right now I can't think of a word that would really translate consolation. You know, consoling someone, consolation is obviously from the root console. You know. Will someone come to my rescue?
We have another question. It asks, what did you mean when you said Asiyih Khanum fell from a height of elevation?
Yeah, she was outside on a higher platform somewhere that we don't know the exact spot. It has been recorded as somewhere high. So by elevation, it means some place that was higher than the ground.
Thank you. We have another question. Has the time of Baha'u'llah's prophecy quoted in slide 28 now come?
Yes, because the Universal House of Justice has been established, and the ark, you know, that rainbow-shaped design that the Guardian started by placing the monuments of Bahá'í Khanum, Asiyih Khanum, and Mirza Mehdi on one level. And he said these will be the focal center of the future administrative institutions of the faith. And then during the time, towards the end of Sheikh Effendi's life, he started the first of those institutions, which is the International Archive. He built during his time the International Archives. Then during the time of the Universal House of Justice, which was established in 1963, they started getting design for the other buildings, which are the seat of the Universal House of Justice, the Center for the Study of the Text, and the International Teaching Center. These are the 4 international institutions. There is one more to be built, that is the International Library. We don't know when that will be. The Universal House of Justice will decide.
Thank you. Another question asks, is Asiyih Khanum's resting place the one that is closer to Bahá'í Khanum?
Actually, you know, these two, Asiyih Khanum and Mirza Mehdi, they are very close to each other. And the one of Mirza Mehdi is closer to Bahá'í Khanum. So Asiyih Khanum's resting place is closer to the set of stairs that behind her monument takes you up and the one of Mirza Mehdi's monument is closer to, is between Asiyih Khanum and the greatest one.
We have one question. It asks, how did Asiyih Khanum embody the principle of the equality of men and women?
Sorry, would you repeat it, please?
Yes. How did Asiyih Khanum embody the principle of the equality of men and women?
How could she? Because the beginning of the history of the Baha'i Faith is very much influenced by traditional way of life in the Islamic country. And the early history of our faith actually is influenced by that kind of mindset. That's why we do not see much reference to Asiyih Khanum or the history of her life or any other woman except Tahireh and to a lesser degree Zainab. They are not covered fully because the traditions of the time did not allow for women's personal information to be divulged. Women were to remain as obscure as possible, especially those related to the manifestation of God. So in that sense, she could not go out and do things that women do these days. But by supporting Baha'u'lláh fully and doing her best to promote the principles of the faith, she contributed to what we enjoy today. We can talk about her life without any hindrance. And I see in chats, if you don't mind, someone has put consolation means tasalli dadan, and that's exactly it.
We also have another question. It asks, what significance do you think Asiyah's life has for women today?
I think very much significance in that, unlike the history of the past, that women became more and more obscure as the dispensation continued. In the Baha'i faith, women like Asiyih Khanum is becoming more prominent and significant as we find clues in the writings of Baha'u'lláh, of Abdu'l, of Shogh Effendi. When I was writing the leaves of the twin divine trees, the most authentic information I could find about the women related to Baha'u'lláh and the Bab were actually from the writings of the Bab and Baha'u'lláh. Unfortunately, these have been have survived, are archived, and we can access. So in that sense, Shogh Effendi, when he transferred the remains of Asiyih Khanum, gathered a lot of material from the writings, translated them, and made them known to the Baha'i world. And so it's an example that we should follow that pattern and continue to find material and publish them. It's there forever. It's asking, when is it appropriate to refer to Asiyih Khanum as Nawwab? This title actually Baha'u'lláh confirmed. She was known as Nawwabeh as a little child, as a little girl, but Baha'u'lláh addressed her as Nawwab, which is the masculine form of Nawwabeh, because she was a full Nawwab in its full sense. And so it's a title that Baha'u'lláh has given her, and we can use it whenever we please.
Well, if we don't have any more questions, then I want to thank you so much again for your talk. And these questions actually really helped add to all the details of Asiyih Khanum's life. And so thank you for staying and answering these questions. And thank you so much again for your talk.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
So now I'll introduce our speaker for next time. We actually have two speakers. It's going to be Mr. Earl Redman and Mrs. Sharon O'Toole, and they're going to be talking about who was Shoghi Effendi. And again, these talks occur every Saturday at noon Eastern Standard Time, so you can invite your friends and family. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that we'll put in the chat again. And now we're going to close with a Baha'i song.
Came down with a message to a lonely man lying in chains, and the whole world was changed. You brought the time for all humankind to know that we were meant to live together peacefully. You told the story of God's great glory, beacon in the darkness, a strange holy light, made of heaven. Sing to my soul, you came down with a message to a lonely man lying in chains, and the whole world was changed. You brought the sign, oh humankind, reminding us of God's great healing, the power of love, Bahá'u'lláh. You set the whole world reeling. Made of heaven, sing to my soul, you came down with a message, oh, to a lonely man lying in chains, and the whole world was changed, and the whole world was changed.
Have a great week, everyone. Hope to see you all next Saturday. Bye.
Thank you and your family for doing this service.
Thank you.